right, so before we talk about my sample answers, which yours might not be exactly what I said, but we can kind of talk about it, and then we'll look at my sample answers and compare and contrast. It was brought to my attention yesterday that the test date that we have set, do you guys remember when we had talked about this test being? Wednesday, October 12th.
Oh.
That's SAT day. I can't give you guys a test on that day. So, we're going to try to get it in on Tuesday, the day before SAT, so that that's out of the way. All right, so go ahead and make that note. Tuesday the 11th, instead of Wednesday the 12th, since I won't have you. Yes, sir?
Oh, we won't have schoolwork.
I'm trying to remember exactly what the whole thing is.
I know sophomores and I think juniors are taking the PSAT. Seniors are supposed to be doing like a college visit or a job shadow. I don't know about freshmen.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. So I think freshmen are supposed to do a job shadow that day. Like, at least this is the way they did it in the past. Everything keeps changing this year. So last year what they did on this day was sophomores and juniors took the PSAT. Freshmen did a job shadow day, and seniors had college visit or job shadow day. So you guys will not report to the building at all that day unless you are a sophomore or junior. Wednesday, the, 13th? 12th. Sorry, I had my day off by one. Wednesday the 12th. It's the Wednesday before fall break. Why they decided to do it 2 days before fall break? I don't know. I have no good answers. To me, that sounds like starting fall break early. So I don't set the calendar. I just adjust my plans based on their calendar. All right. So let's look at the check for understanding. Manager of a large oceanfront hotel would like to survey their guests to determine satisfaction with the view from their room. The hotel has 10 floors. Half the rooms overlook the ocean and the other half overlook the street. There are 50 rooms on each floor for a total of 500 rooms. The hotel manager would like to select a sample of 50 rooms. How could they do a stratified sample of 50 rooms? Yes, ma'am.
They could use a number generator to from 1 to 50 and take the first 5 numbers.
First 5 numbers.
Do those 5 numbers on each floor.
On each floor. So the strata would be by floor, yes. And choose 5 rooms using a simple, like a random number generator. So you get a simple random sample from each of the 5 floors. Did anybody come up with a different way of doing stratified? Yes, ma'am.
Use 25 from each, street view, 25 from ocean view.
Yeah, using street view and ocean view as your strata. You could do 25 rooms street view, 25 rooms ocean view. Either one of those would be appropriate ways to do a stratified sample. Absolutely. So you could stratify by floor. The one that I came up with first was the ocean view versus street view. So you'd have 1 to 250 on each of those. Random number generator to select your 25 rooms. How could you do a cluster sample of 50 rooms?
Use a random number generator, 1 through 10, and pick, once you get the number, survey everyone on that floor.
Absolutely. Label the floors 1 through 10. Each floor would be a cluster. And pick one floor, survey all the rooms on that selected floor. That would be an appropriate way to do cluster sampling. I'm not saying that these are the only ways to do these, but we want to make sure that we can come up with some way of quantifying how we would lay out this survey. What about systematic random sampling for the 50 rooms? How would you do that? Yes, ma'am.
I was thinking by 10, taking it by 10 so it all comes out pretty even.
Yeah. So you'd still have to pick a random place to start. You wouldn't necessarily want to start with room number 1 on floor 1. Pick a random place to start, and then you could do every 10th room until you get up to 50 rooms. Absolutely. So what's the benefit to using stratified sampling? in this particular context, what would be the benefit of using stratified sampling?
You get a response from every floor or every side.
Yeah. So if you did your sampling if you did your strata by floor, you'd make sure to get the opinions of people on each of those floors. Maybe it makes a difference. Maybe people don't really like the view from the ground floors, but they love it from the upper floors. Or maybe street view is fine from the upper floors, but ocean view is better from the lower floors, kind of things. If you had your strata as ocean view versus street view, you make sure to get opinions from people on both sides of the hotel with an even number, not an even number, but the same number, like an equal number on each side. Reduces your variability. It's going to give you more precise estimates. So definite benefits to stratified sampling. The question didn't ask for this, but can you guys think of any problems or realistic places where you'd run into issues doing stratified sampling?
You might, if you go by floor, there's a very real chance you get no one on the ocean side and just everyone on the street side.
Absolutely. If you do your strata by floor, it's possible that when you pull your random numbers for each floor, you end up with only street side opinions. One of the other things that I was thinking about here is if you do your stratified sampling and that room is empty, you'd then have to go pick new rooms. For stratified sampling, you have to have a really good idea of what you're using as your strata, and then you have to be able to number and label everybody in those groups. What about cluster sampling? In this context, what's the benefit of using cluster sampling? Yeah, it's quick, easy. You go to one floor, knock on every door, and then you're done. Easy and fast.
And it will include both street and ocean view.
You're going to get both ocean view and street side in your cluster if your clusters are each floor, absolutely. What's the benefit to doing systematic sampling in this context?
It gets a wider spread. You're likely to get both ocean and street view and also multiple floors.
Yes. You're going to get ocean view, you're going to get street view, you're going to get different floors. It's going to be more spread out throughout the building. You ensure rooms from all floors. You don't ensure necessarily that you're going to get street view and ocean view, but chances are highly, highly, highly likely that you're going to get somebody from each view as well. So from here, go ahead and flip over to the next page that has writing on it. I want to say that's page 15. I want to talk about some problems with survey sampling. All right, so we've got the mayor of Springfield here. Mayor of Springfield is interested in finding out the average age of people in the city. He obtains a list of all the landline telephones in the city and then contacts a simple random sample of 300 people. He uses the data from the sample to estimate the average age of all the people in the city. What's wrong with that? Yes, ma'am.
People who all of the phone will answer it are most likely going to be adults and parents, and not everybody will own a landline phone.
Absolutely. You're going after the average age of all the people in the city. If there's a landline in the house to begin with, it's probably going to be adults answering the phone. And Joan pointed out the very real situation that, 30, 40 years ago, there would have been some questions here, but not as many as now. It's not super common for households to have landlines like it used to be. Yes, ma'am.
Also, like in my house, if you get a call from a number you don't know, you don't answer.
Exactly. Like old school landlines before they even had caller ID, you had a better chance of that working. But yeah, once caller ID and cell phones became common, I'm the exact same way. I don't know that number. No, you can leave a message, and then I'll see if it's important. So you're not going to get enough information. He's only contacting people with landlines. People without landlines aren't even being contacted here. We also mentioned that the people answering the landlines are typically going to be older. So this idea right here is called undercoverage. Even though he is calling a simple random sample of 300 households, there are some groups that are being left out here or that aren't being included. Let me pop that up a little higher. There we go. Do you think the mayor is going to end up overestimating or underestimating the true mean age of people in Springfield?
Overestimate.
Over. Why?
Because typically older people have landlines.
Typically, older people are the ones that still have their landlines. I know my mom just got rid of her landline when she moved last summer. Just now. She's had cell phones for a while, but she's like, I've had my landline for 30 years. I'm just going to keep paying the bill. And she hung on to it. When she moved and it came time to actually set up a transfer, she's like, nah, we'll just cancel it. We're good. So yeah, it's going to end up being an overestimate. People with landlines tend to be older. Obviously, this isn't true for everybody. We're talking about typical or expected situations. Take a moment to read through number 2 and figure out what's wrong with that one. What is wrong with this sample? Yes, ma'am.
Some could have done it in school.
Some could have done it at school.
Only 40 people responded.
Only 40 people responded.
Oh, they could have lied.
They could have lied. This email came from admin. Mr. Inman stops you in the hall, says, did you do your homework last night? Yes, sir, I did. I'm not even going to think about what I did last night. My answer is yes, sir, I did. Yes, ma'am.
Some people might not have had homework
Some people might not have had homework
at all.
at all, depending on their classes, depending on their schedule. Yes, ma'am.
Some people don't check their email.
Some people don't check their emails, especially their school email. So there's lots of problems. Only 40 students responded, absolutely. And all of the ideas that you guys said, absolutely. I only wrote down a couple of these, but everything that we discussed, absolutely true. Students might lie and say they did their homework when they didn't. We can add in these other things of some people don't check their email. Maybe they didn't have homework. So the first issue up there where only 40 of the 100 students responded, that is non-response bias. The other one where they're lying is response bias. So there's a non-response issue. Only 40 of 100 students responded. This is the kind of thing that we see with like Amazon reviews and Yelp reviews. Does everybody that buys a product leave a review for it? No. Of the responses that you get, those people tend to have strong opinions one way or the other. Somebody either proudly emails back, no, I did not do my homework and I don't intend to. Or, yes, I did my homework. Yes, I did my homework. Response bias is where you're not getting honest answers from people. Sometimes this is because of the way the question is worded. Sometimes it's because of who is doing the asking. In this case, if administration is asking, there's an authority, there's a power imbalance. That will absolutely affect people's comfort level with telling the truth. We saw a lot of what we're assuming is response bias in the polling that happened prior to the 2016 election. Everybody woke up the next morning quite surprised at these results. The polling results all the way up until the night of the election said, this is, it's kind of close-ish, but this is Hillary's. Hillary's going to win. All of our polling points to Hillary. Didn't work that way. So either they were getting some non-response or some undercoverage. They weren't actually going out and getting information from all these different groups. Or one of the things that I've read a lot of articles about is that there was some response bias. That just knowing that you're being called by a polling organization, people that were thinking about or tending to lean more towards voting for Trump didn't necessarily want to talk to a media outlet or a polling organization about that. They were uncomfortable with it. They already felt like they were biased, and so they were not giving their honest, true feelings about this. Do you think that the administration is going to over or underestimate the true proportion of students who did all their homework last night? I think this is going to be an overestimate again. Students who didn't do their homework probably aren't going to reply, either because they didn't do their homework or because they didn't check their email. I know a lot of times if I get emails saying, oh, please respond to this survey, and I read the survey and it's like, none of that applies to me. Delete. And I don't even respond. So then they're missing that vital piece of information. And scenario number 3, Peter, good old Boy Scout Peter. He wants to know how many people in his neighborhood support the Boy Scouts. So he gets all dressed up in his little uniform, puts on his little kerchief, and goes door knocking. What's the problem? He's a Boy Scout. They don't want to make him feel bad. Here he is in his cute little Boy Scout uniform at their door. Of course I support the Boy Scouts. Aren't you so cute? Whether they do or not.
He's also going to ask people in his neighborhood, and normally I'm a Girl Scout and I'll ask people in my neighborhood if they want to buy cookies.
Mm-hmm.
And so that gives them a positive view.
Absolutely. Yes, I support the Boy Scouts. You bring me popcorn every year. Peter's wearing his uniform. People know he is a Boy Scout, which might influence their responses. Funny enough, we see phenomenon like this happen even when people aren't asked to give verbal responses to things. We see in medical settings that if people go to a doctor's office, and there's terminology for this, and I'm losing it right now. It's like white coat something. White coat syndrome, thank you. I was going to say, I couldn't remember the last part of it. But just being in a doctor's office in the presence of a doctor, a healthcare provider, for a large proportion of the population, that causes their blood pressure to rise. And it will be artificially high. So this isn't necessarily just in verbal responses. Sometimes having someone in uniform and having their position denoted will affect voluntary and involuntary things. You think Peter is going to overestimate or underestimate the true proportion of people that supports the Boy Scouts? Overestimate. We get a response bias here. They're going to overestimate. People might say they support the Boy Scouts even if they don't, because they don't want to offend poor Peter. And while all 3 of these examples were ending up with overestimates of the true mean, obviously there could be other situations where we are getting some underestimates of the true mean. So that gets us to our big ideas for the day. 3 big takeaways, and I will put this up on the screen here in just a moment, but our 3 big takeaways are undercoverage, non-response, and response bias. And this is in addition to problems that we have just in selecting our sample. You guys remember we talked about convenience samples and voluntary samples? those can cause problems as we're trying to estimate the true mean, and then how we're asking our questions or who is asking the questions can also affect that. So big ideas: undercoverage, non-response, and response. Undercoverage is specifically when some members of a population cannot be or are less likely to be included in the sample. If I decided to collect a sample from noon to 1 p.m. at Meyer, I'm probably not getting a good representation of all of the people that go to Meyer. So if I'm there from noon to 1, I'm missing everybody that's at work during those hours. Non-response, when there's an individual that is part of a sample, but they choose not to respond, or they can't be reached. This is different from the sampling method that we talked about that was voluntary response. In voluntary response, the person responding decided whether or not they wanted to participate. It was open to everybody. Voluntary response would definitely be things like Yelp reviews and Amazon reviews. Everybody that has purchased this product, everybody that has visited this location, please come and leave a review. Non-response is specifically when I, as the researcher, have picked out my sample and some of the people in my sample have refused or are not able to participate. And then we've got response bias, where we have a pattern of inaccurate results based on wording of the question or the interviewer or lying or whatever, but we see this pattern of results that are not reflective of the actual situation. Once you guys finish getting this bit copied down, I want you to go try the check for understanding, and then we will compare yours with mine. see what we got. Name the type of bias. Principal of a large high school wants to learn about student opinion regarding remote learning versus in-person learning. So they select a simple random sample of those who signed up for remote learning. What kind of bias is that? Undercoverage. Students who are doing in-person learning are not being included. For B, the principal emails a random sample of 100 students, but only 28 students respond. Non-response. 72 students who were chosen to be in the sample didn't respond. The ones who replied probably had strong opinions. That's definitely going to skew those results. Principal surveys the first 50 students that submit their learning preference for the upcoming school year. What is the problem with that one? Hint, it's not one of the ones that we talked about today.
It's voluntary response.
Yes. Did you have a thought, Sandra? This would be a convenience sample. First 50 to submit their responses may not represent the population. It was very convenient for the principal to grab just the first 50. I would call this a voluntary response bias if he took like everybody that actually responded. Maybe not everybody did. He just puts it out there, hey, what do you think? And he takes all those. That would be voluntary response. This one is convenient for him to collect. All right, let's look at this last piece, and then as promised, I'm going to get your tests back in your hands so you guys can see those. The following question was on the Pennsylvania general election ballot in the 2016 election. Shall the Pennsylvania Constitution be amended to require that justices of the Supreme Court, judges, and magisterial district judges be retired on the last day of the calendar year in which they attain the age of 75 years? That is a literal ballot question. The wording seems to imply that there should be mandatory retirement. What was not included in the question is that mandatory retirement already exists at the age of 70 years. Due to the wording of the question, is the percentage of people who voted yes likely to be less than, greater than, or about equal to the percent of all voters who would vote yes if the question were not misleading? What do you think? Yes, ma'am.
I said it was likely to be greater than because by leaving out the fact that there's already a mandatory requirement, those who don't know that think it might be like a new thing and say, oh, that sounds reasonable when they don't realize they're actually raising the age.
Yes. People that don't understand that there's already mandatory retirement at 70 are likely taking this to be a question about should we have mandatory retirement? And so they're like, well, absolutely. When what they're really asking about is should we raise the age? There's a lot of people that probably think it should stay at 70. And if they understood that that's what the question about, they probably would have voted no. So they're probably going to end up with an overestimate. It's probably greater than the truth. First homework is due tomorrow. Front back 4.1. I'll pass out 4.2 tomorrow and give you that due date when I see you.